All right, welcome to Beccaro and Hook. We are live on Rumble, YouTube, Patriot.tv, / DHED. And we're also, of course, on X America News. Tom, this is like a laundry list of where we are, but we're really proud of the fact that we've got a brand new landing page, DellandHook.com. DellandHook.com. Big show today. It's kind of part two of where we left off yesterday. We've been talking about the fires, and we're going to get to that in just a bit. We've got a great guest, legendary meteorologist, and as well as author. Brian Sussman will be joining us in a little bit. But Tom, let's talk about something that we were talking about a little bit off air, and that is Biden coming out. You know, you've seen, no doubt, the evolution of Mark Zuckerberg. The hair's growing out. He's trying to look a little bit more hip. He's a little bit more cool. Wants to sit at the big guys' table, and he wants to sit at the cool kids' table. And now he's saying, you know what? We're going to get rid of the fact checkers. And Biden says, how un-American not to censor on Facebook. I mean, only in Joe Biden's America is that an American thing to do. Censorship is American, according to Joe Biden. What do you think about that?
I mean, I wrote a book about it. The Lessons of the American Civilization. One of my lines in there is that dissent is the mother of democracy. And what I mean by that is the ability to say no to those in power that's the start of freedom. If you don't have that unfettered ability, then freedom is either gone or going to be gone soon enough. And I talk in the book about how technology has made it easier for authoritarians because they can spy on you, they know what you're doing, and they can use big tech, in this case, to shut you down.
And they did it.
Yeah, and it's not speculation. They did it. And Zuckerberg's admitting this. Now, what if Donald Trump hadn't succeeded? What if Elon Musk hadn't have bought Twitter? Elon Musk has made it fashionable again to pursue freedom and dissent. Donald Trump has made it fashionable to do this. And hopefully this sweeps worldwide. Hopefully Facebook really does stop shadow banning me. And every time we say specific words, whether it's COVID or climate change or whatever it is, whether we can actually exchange ideas, right? And so the magnitude of this potential change for Facebook, and it's only potential, so we're going to have to see whether they actually do it. But this is a seminal moment because I am deeply fearful of the American experiment with freedom if this censorship mentality on the left maintains. So Joe Biden says government's ability to control your ability to speak is American. It could not be more 180 from that. But what bothers me is the number of Americans on the left who actually believe that.
Yeah, it's the antithesis of freedom and liberty. Individual liberty is something you never hear Joe Biden talk about. It's all about, that's not who we are. There's always this collectiveness with the way they speak about things. It just drives me nuts. And Tom, this is a perfect segue. Frankly, and just another pointing out all the failures that is this ideology. Call it woke, call it whatever the hell you want, but everything they touch turns to Marxist crap. And what we're seeing play out in LA with these fires is, frankly, obviously it's devastating to everybody that's lost homes, businesses, lives. I mean, everything. But it's kind of systemic, isn't it? Victor Davis Hanson, who is a very sharp guy, he was on a podcast. I want to get this right because I want to make sure that I give this guy the proper accreditation. He was on a podcast called Western Lensman. Maybe we'll get him on our show one day. But listen to what he says about what's going on in California, because I really think, Tom, to your point, he kind of shows the anti-Americanism of where they're going with all of this. Go.
So it was a total systems collapse from the idea of not spending money on irrigation, storage, water, fire prevention, in forest management, a viable insurance industry, a DEI hierarchy. You put it all together, and it's something like a DEI Green New Deal hydrogen bomb. Gavin Newsom was fiddling. He's almost Nero Newsom. And this has been something that is just unimaginable, this systems breakdown. And to finish, what we're seeing in California is a state with 40 million people. And yet the people who run it feel that it should return to a 19th century pastoral condition. They are de-civilizing the state and de-industrializing the state and de-farming the state, but they're not telling the 40 million people that their lifestyles will have to revert back to the 19th century when you had no protection from fire, you didn't have enough water in California, you didn't have enough power, you didn't pump oil. So we are deliberately making these decisions not to develop energy, not to develop a timber industry, not to protect the insurance industry, not to protect houses and property. And we're doing it in almost a purely nihilistic fashion. And Karen Bass should resign. She came to the airport back from Africa. She had nothing to say. She was confronted at the airport. Why were you in Africa? Why did you cut the fire department? They cut the fire department by almost $18 million. They gave fire protective equipment to Ukraine's first responders. And she had nothing to say. She had nothing to say because she couldn't say anything. I don't want to be too pessimistic or bleak tonight, but this is one of the most alarming symptoms of a society gone mad. And if this continues, and if this were to spread to other states, we would become a third world country if we're not in parts already.
Wow. I mean, yeah, you see, and I'm sure Brian is going to have something to say about this coming up too. It is cult-like mentality that that these environmentalists have out there in California. And now they're starting to reap the consequences of that, man. You know, I hate to say it, but it's just.
Yeah, and in part we've had, returning back to Meta, we've had in the state of California, where I've been for decades, we have one media and therefore no discussion. When I ran against Kamala Harris, it was a media blackout. I debated her. I actually won that debate, but you wouldn't have known that if you were someone in that state. You would think a U.S. senator, the race for a U.S. senatorship race, for the fifth biggest economy in the world would be momentous. Wouldn't you want to have a robust discussion about what's best for people? No, it is censorship by blackout. And that's what was going on throughout California for so long. So all those things that Victor David Hanson is describing occur under the radar with a single media and no discussion points.
Yeah, and it's always played up on an emotional feels. What's the feels? You know, we got to protect the Delta smelt. We talked about that. We've got to protect the woodland owl. We've got to protect this, that, and the other. What about protecting the people that live there? No, good God, no, you can't do that.
Well, we're colonizers.
Yeah, we're the invasive
of Mother
species.
Earth.
Unbelievable. It really is. It's you know, the thing is, Tom, you try to put your mind into where their mind is, and it's so insane that I can't even go there. I'm like, what kind of absurdity is this? But this is where we are, and I suspect that we're going to see as the Santa Ana winds shift and the fires blow around and burn down more, God forbid, but they're going to. We know it's going to happen. Maybe the political winds will change directions in California. Maybe that's a lot to ask. I mean, a lot of these people aren't going to be living in California anymore. That's the thing. They're leaving. They're going to get out of there. They've got literally nothing left. I just can't imagine what's going through those poor folks' minds.
Well, you're right. They're not going to be allowed to build back, and they are being driven out of the state. Unfortunately for the state, it's still the Democrats still have a 21% voter registration advantage. The Republican Party has to get much bolder It has to talk about the alternatives. The Democrats have handed them the homeless crisis, handed them the crime crisis, handed them the water crisis, handed the Republicans the fire crisis. And they have to provide this alternative. And until they do that in a vibrant manner and provide alternatives. Look, in the last election, Republicans voted and Democrats voted almost in tandem to repeal the terrible $950 limit which you can steal and not be charged with anything in effect. That passed at 70% because, as I've been saying for 3 years in this state, they're bottoming out on crime. They're bottoming out on homelessness. This should make them bottom out on fire and create priorities. There's a $325 billion budget in California. And where's that money going? And it's not going to public safety.
No.
Yes, there's money there. Don't write in and say, but the point is, it's not the highest priority. Newsom last year cut $100 million from the budget took $100 million away from firefighting. I mean, you can't make this up. Karen Bass turned down New York firefighters, even though there's a lack of them, and they're bringing in firefighters from Mexico. I mean, they just, it's not there. And again, the issue, like with Facebook and Meta, is all those things that Victor David Hanson talked about. This deculturalization, all of those things. Those aren't things the voters voted on. They didn't say we want to deindustrialize or go back to the 19th century. These are things that happen under the radar with unelected officials, like California Air Resource Board, the Coastal Commission that now claims jurisdiction, upriver some 75 miles. They are doing these things all under the radar to drive people out of the state of California, and they're succeeding.
Yeah, and they're doing it, by the way, also, and it should be mentioned, they're doing it hand in hand with these NGOs, groups like the Sierra Club, that are absolutely down for that fight, and they don't much give a rip because they're going to stand up there and saying anti-growth, anti-industrialization policies until the bitter end. It is weird, Tom. You see, they don't want anybody talking about it on Meta, but they want to have censorship, abilities. They really are like, they're basically showing you their hand. We want to force our ideology down your throat. The country just spoke loudly about that back in November, and I suspect we're going to get a different mindset come January 21, at least from D.C.
If Republicans get their act together and succeed, and people are made to see what's happening in Argentina today, which is that he broke the hand of government, went directly to the people, and allowed them to recapture their freedoms and their lives. Yeah. And that's what that's what's at stake. So if you're a congressman in the United States today and you're a Republican, and the big picture here is, if you don't succeed this time, then nothing else matters. We are living on this knife's edge. So I think it's great everybody thinks there's a realignment. There hasn't been a realignment. There has been a breaking of the shackles. But throughout history, the shackles have returned quickly when those in power have wasted it.
Yeah, and sadly, the Republicans have a long history of kicking themselves in the nuts. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And of course, this time around, Speaker Johnson.
I said shackles. You said nuts. But go on.
Well, I mean, seriously though, Tom. I mean, they step on their own junk all the time. They would, it's kind of the MO of the Republicans, sadly. And in a way, that's kind of good because it means they're not all a herd of sheep. But that sheep-like mentality of many Democrat politicians is what gets them across the finish line so many times. So Republicans better get it together. And Johnson he's got the slimmest majority in 70, almost 80 years to work with. It's going to be a big haul, but like I said, sometimes sometimes the political winds shift because of stuff like what we're seeing in LA. They shift because of Zuckerberg is an example of the political wind shifting. Certainly in Silicon Valley, he's starting to rethink. He's taking a page out of Elon Musk's playbook.
Hopefully he does that. We gotta break. My good friend and great author and weatherman is going to help us understand that it isn't climate change causing these fires in LA. So Brian Sussman will be next. We want to thank you. Go to DellandHook.com. You can catch all our shows there, and you'll also be able to see us on YouTube. You see us on Patriot.tv. You see us on Rumble.
Ex-America News.
Ex-America News, and on Steve's TV inside his house. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to Beccaro and Hook. This is our second in a special series related to the fires in LA. Yesterday, we spoke to Congressman Doug LaMalfa with regard to policy and politics related to this. And today, I'm super excited to have a longtime friend of mine. You know him as the legendary Brian Sussman, award-winning meteorologist, Hall of Fame radio host, best-selling author, Climate Gate, and he's got a great new book out, Climate Cult. Now, those are sort of the big-ticket items, but Brian is in significant part responsible for or played a big role in my media career. He put me on the radio you remember those days, Brian, very early on. So if you're listening out there and you're completely angry, I want you to email Brian at... Brian has one of the great Twitter handles of all time because, of course, he's been talking about climate change for years, and it is Debate Me Al Gore, which has the same possibility as happening as me opening day for the Yankees pitching. I've asked several times, and I think Brian has too, but neither's going to happen. Brian, welcome to the show. So glad to have you here.
Great to be with you, Tom.
So I immediately thought of you when, of course, the Karen Bass and Newsom and Bernie Sanders and Biden brought out the get out of responsibility card, otherwise known as climate change. And they, of course, saying this is what is going on and why these fires came around. Brian, as you know, the Santa Ana winds started when Newsom became president or governor of California, and they didn't exist for millennium, right? So, but I did early on, you did a great post about the Santa Ana winds and what causes them. And quite honestly, I've been repeating it on air all across the country. So if you could start out this segment with helping viewers understand the unique topography that is that area of the United States. I tell people 90% of the tornadoes in the world happen in Tornado Alley because of the geography, right? And the geography in the Palisades matter. So if you could take it from there.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, geography is everything when it comes to weather. This has nothing to do with climate change. This has everything to do with a seasonal weather pattern, which in this particular case was broadcast ahead of time. It was last week. It was last week that the National Weather Service in LA was saying, we're about to have Santa Ana winds, and they could be very, very gusty. That was last week, several days before this event occurred. So in California, we have something called an offshore wind that develops. You get a high pressure system that sets up in the desert Southwest, usually during the cold months, the cooler months, the winter months. You have a high pressure system that sets up in the desert Southwest, a low pressure system offshore. Air flows from high pressure to low pressure. It's just like you would expect. From high to low, that's how the air flows. What is flowing in that direction from onshore to offshore along the California coastline, there are some very large mountains. In Southern California, you have mountains that are about 5,600 feet. In Central California, where they have this same thing take place from time to time, there are mountains that are about 6,000 feet. You get to the San Francisco Bay Area, it's the same thing. And in each particular case, we call the winds something a little different. Southern California, they're the Santa Ana winds. In Santa Barbara, they're called the Sundowner winds. In San Francisco Bay Area, they're called the Diablo winds. But the air flows down the sides of the ocean sides of the mountains, and as it flows down, it naturally dries out and heats up. So you'll have 0% humidity, air incredibly dry, winds blowing 50, 60, 70, 80, in this particular case in Southern California, blowing 100 miles an hour. And as such, the conditions are ripe for fire danger. I mean, you remember this, Tom. You remember the Oakland fire we had back in the early 90s. I mean, you lived very close to that. You probably had to evacuate. That was a situation where we had these high winds coming down the mountainsides of Oakland towards the ocean. Air dried out. Somehow a fire started, and it was hell on earth. The same thing happened in Southern California. Now, they're blaming this on climate change. They're calling it a natural disaster. As of this moment, as I speak, there's been no indication of how this fire started other than arson. Nobody can point a finger as saying that it just somehow started automatically. This was likely, at this point in time, it looks as if it was arson. So I step back for just a moment on all that, because that's the natural effect of what's going on.
Okay, can I stop you real quick? Can you also explain? I used to work up in Alaska. We used to fly small planes, and you flew around mountains, not over them, because of wind shear. And people need to understand, when that wind hits the peak of a mountain, it accelerates.
Yes, a great point. Wind shear. Wind shear is everything. So what you have here is accelerated winds, and as the air flows down that mountainside, it actually warms. It's kind of the opposite of what you would think. So it warms as it comes down, and there's a wind shear effect, and it's vicious. So you throw a spark into the mix, and man, things are ready to burn right now. Now, let me I'm going to stay on this topic, but I'm going to go in a little different direction with you, because I wrote extensively. This was a 2012 book, Eco-Tyranny. I talk about this in Eco-Tyranny. In 2005, the FBI said the biggest domestic terror threat in the United States, this is 2005, the FBI, the biggest domestic terror threat was eco-terrorism. Do you think those eco-terrorists have gone away? They're still there. They've just gotten very, very clever. And it would not surprise me. These people now work in government. They're part of the deep state. They've entered into these little areas. It would not surprise me if somebody like the Earth Liberation Front or Earth First or one of these organizations, which are, by the way, very well funded, it wouldn't surprise me if their members said, boy, this is a prime opportunity to start some fires. Now, why would they want to do that? Because these radical eco-terrorists, these radical eco-freaks, these radical environmentalists all believe the same thing. They believe in something that was started by the United Nations in 1983 called sustainable development. In other words, gas, oil, that's not sustainable. They want a natural environment that's powered by wind and powered by solar. They see houses as being unsustainable. What we need is stack and pack houses. We don't need individual houses. So let me just continue with this for just a moment. So what they see is Los Angeles in particular is very unsustainable. It's outdated. And as such, they also believe sustainable development is tied at the hip with something called social equity. Social equity is not DEI. It's not what you saw in these press conferences Saturday down in Los Angeles with the mayor and the fire chief, and they're all standing next to somebody who's doing this interpretation to help the people that can't hear. Can I tell you something? The deaf people have closed caption. They don't need this nonsense. All that was designed to do is make it look as if we care. We care. These blowhards don't care. They allowed this to happen. Social equity means this: the ants are just as important as the humans. The trees are just as important as the humans. And by the way, the humans are an invasive species. Listen, this isn't me talking. This comes right from the United Nations. So you get these eco freaks to say, you know what? Perhaps let's just burn the damn place down. Let's burn it all down. Let's return it to nature, especially those homes in Malibu. That's a very eco-sensitive area. I wouldn't be surprised if this ever gets unpacked, that's at the root of this entire awful, terrible fire, which we do know in some cases has been man-made. You know, we've got on video people starting these fires. It's out there.
And Brian, the next step is, of course, the massive push after this, where they're going to say you can't rebuild there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's what we've seen in so many other locations around the country. You can't build there. They want to return, they want to restore this back to nature. And what a great place to begin. Los Angeles. I mean, this is a world-renowned urban area. What a great place to begin. So it wouldn't surprise me if we ended up learning that there were some elements of that involved in these terrible fires. But to blame it on climate change is a cop-out. If anything, we can blame a lot of the exacerbation of these fires on the incompetence of the leadership in Los Angeles. I'm watching these press conferences and I'm thinking to myself, and listen, I've been around the block. I'm an old guy in my late 60s now, and I'm telling you something. These people could not make it in the private sector. They're bureaucrats that can only survive in that kind of atmosphere where really and truly not a lot is expected of them.
Yeah. Hey, Brian, welcome to the show. It's great to have you. Yeah, I just watched the most recent press conference, and they're just glad-handing each other and saying, I couldn't be prouder of this team. And
right.
I'm like, and then they're saying, and they're pointing out fires that are completely contained. That's because there's nothing left to burn in some instances. It's been a disaster from the first spark of the first fire, and it's only gotten worse. And now that you mentioned the winds, correct me if I'm wrong on this. These fires, when they get to be this size, they kind of create their own weather system, don't they?
True.
So what wind could be feeding them only gets ramped up due to their size, correct?
Yeah, it's true. Once those fires begin burning, they do actually create their own internal weather systems, which are exacerbated by the winds that are currently and naturally blowing. But they start their own storm system essentially, and they begin moving very, very erratically. And that's exactly what we've seen in these particular cases. And it's just amazing. I mean, a lot of people don't realize. You guys do, but a lot of people don't realize that are watching this from all around the country and even the world. This fire wasn't just occurring in some of those regions that are forested. And by the way, the forests are completely overgrown in the state of California. We can talk about that in just a moment.
By design.
But this is happening in beautiful, idyllic neighborhoods, just blowing through there like nobody's business, because the storms have essentially at that point in time created their own winds. But getting back to these forests in California, this is again a part of the sustainable development, social equity mentality put forth by the United Nations and Marie Strong early in the 1980s. They don't want to touch the forests any longer. There's no such thing as clearing the forests.
Yeah,
The Native
with
Americans
Congress.
were great about this. They would take care of their forests because they knew the forests were at the very heart of their survival. We've let these damn things overgrow, and they've become a menace.
Yeah, we were talking to Congressman LaMalfa yesterday about this very subject, and he even made the point that even the power company out there, what is it, PSE&G, I guess, out in the West Coast there?
PG&E, yeah.
Yeah, they can't even clear dead essential kindling that's building up like a pyre around their towers. because God forbid we screw up with the Delta smelt or the spotted owl or whatever it is this week. I mean, it's just insanity on steroids. And I'm wondering, Brian, and you can maybe you have a take on this. Do you think that this is going to be, because many people in that area, they're homeless now, rich, poor, black, white, gay, straight, doesn't matter. The blowtorch came through their communities. Is this going to turn California politics around? Is this going to turn attitudes around about this Green New scam?
That's really a great point, because what did we see in the last election with Donald Trump? This was a resounding victory. I mean, people are really obviously waking up. Even if there were any shenanigans going on with the vote, he won with a resounding margin. And I think what you're going to see in Southern California, we're seeing it at some of these press conferences when people are challenging now the mayor of Los Angeles. They don't know where to go. They're used to having everybody just nod their head up and down. Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes, we believe you, whatever you say. People are now seeing through the shenanigans of the lack of leadership in that particular area. So I would agree with you 100%. I think this is an opportunity for some great change. But in the meantime, what you're going to have to deal with are some other factors. This is a real problem in California right now because of these overgrown forests and because of the fires that we have because the forests are overgrown. There are places, I have many friends in the Lake Tahoe area, they can't get fire insurance on their homes any longer. It's either too expensive or not available because the fire insurance companies have realized it's not worth our doing business there. So insurance companies are pulling out of the state of California. I could see something like that happen in the Los Angeles area where either you can't get fire insurance any longer, or if you can, it's going to be incredibly expensive, which will only add to the burden of their already expensive real estate prices.
So, Brian, I never disagree with you on air, but I want to add to what you're saying, because it's not just the forests anymore. Where I live in Lafayette, it's not a forest, but it looks like a forest now. My backyard is very clear. There's a gentleman behind me, retired, fixed income. I actually had my gardeners go clear out some of his, but just up the hill around the Lafayette Reservoir, it would explode. Have you ever traveled between Oakland and Moraga? I just looked up on the hill, and you can't look very far because it's so packed and dense. So it's not just the forests that are overgrown. And it doesn't take very much on these hillsides to start a significant fire, and then, God forbid, you have wind, and it blows. Embers can blow, a quarter mile here, a quarter mile there. And, remember, you talked about the Oakland fire that jumped 8 lanes plus a huge center divide with no problem. So, the thing that drives me nuts is, it's climate change. And at the same time, Brian, they say, well, it's going to take 50 years to lower the temperature. Okay, let's say that's your working assumption. What's your fire plan between now and then? Because these fires, I've been saying this on air since 2020, and now today, where 20 years of growth is a long time, but the average number of acres burning in California is 954,000 a year. As low as 90,000 one year, as high as 1.49 million acres. This is a constant. So when are you going to change policy? And I know your book, tell us a little bit about climate cults. I know that they don't have a plan because they don't want to have the plan. They want us off the planet.
Yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan. Deindustrialization and back to an agrarian, make sure you pee downstream culture. That's what they want.
Spot on. Well said. It's really all true. But you're right. They have no plan. If forest fires have become the norm in this state because the forests are completely overgrown and uncared for at the behest of the radical environmentalists. Again, they see all species as the same. So that dead tree or that tree that's overgrown, or that tree that are too, those are homes for other species that are just as important as the human species. That's the way the environmentalists look at everything. And so if they have to make a point by allowing a fire to begin, or have to make a point by perhaps causing a fire, they will do it. Arson is a big problem in the state of California. It's a problem that no one wants to address. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if at the heart of these initial blazes, we know that some in Southern California were started by individuals, crazy individuals, misguided individuals, idiots. Maybe the first blazes started the same way. So this is a very serious problem. But that's in Climate Cult. The subtitle is Exposing and Defeating the War on Life, Liberty, and Property. These people they're cut from the cloth of Marx. Marx didn't believe in private property. They don't believe in private property. So if they can use environmental disasters, if they can use environmental concerns that may be completely fake, not filled with any scientific reliability, they will do that in the event of vanquishing our ability in this country, our unique ability to this country to own private property.
Yeah, Will Durant used to say that communism begins where private property ends. And the other thing, Brian, they want to push us into cities. I did in April of when COVID started at Epic Times, I did an article about the history of pandemics, which followed trade and large cities. So here they are pushing us all to live together so that we can communicate diseases quickly among ourselves and cause these problems. And I'm also unconvinced as a historian that the human species was meant to live in such proximity. One of the reasons why you have so much mental illness in this world is because we're over 80% urbanized now, and the intensity of that, especially in the cities, on the human species. There's some people who thrive on it. I love being in New York City. I love used to love San Francisco, but it's too much. So their policies are causing all these fires, killing the species they think they want to care about. And then they're driving us into cities, creating even worse problems. But, maybe you could, do you see a way out of this for them or us?
Wow, but you're right. I mean, this whole idea, we like to refer to it nowadays as stack and pack housing. And their whole goal is to crowd us into, you've heard the term the 15-minute city. Well, that's all on the record. I mean, this is a part of the plan that's been put in place. It began in the bowels of the United Nations. It's been pushed by the people that meet at Davos every year. So they want to herd us into these cities where we can be better controlled and where resources
Smart living.
can be, yes,
Yeah.
That's smart living, which is dumb living. And you're right, it doesn't work for a lot of people. It's certainly, but it's certain for them. It's a great way to keep us under control and keep us under wraps. But all anybody has to do is look. When you fly over the United States of America, and if you have a window seat and you peer out that window, you can see that most of the United States is wilderness. There's plenty of room for us to expand and grow and move into other places, but they make it sound as if we're so overpopulated, there are no places like that left in the United States, let alone the rest of the world. So it's just this big...
You could give an acre to every person in the United States inside Texas.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
And
yes,
but you know what they look at it as every twig is an ecosystem. Every leaf is a possible ecosystem. I mean, at this point, you can't even deal with these people rationally because there's nothing rational about them. So why do they hold so much sway? I guess it's money, but I would think that there's a whole passel full of people in LA that are pissed off about it and probably are going to tell them all to go pound sand.
You know, what's interesting? You bring up the word ecosystem. I talk about this in Climate Cult. When you look at some of the first initial disciples of Karl Marx, and I mention them by name and I show their relationship to Marx. They were students of Marx and they were colleagues of Marx. They were the ones who actually came up with the term ecosystem. And they came up with that term because they needed something that was neat and tidy to illustrate the need for communism. So their point was industrialization was naturally going to ruin the environment. They came up with this term ecosystem. Ecosystem can be something as big as a leaf, as you just mentioned, or it could be something as great as an ocean. But the whole idea of the word ecosystem was to imply that industrialization, specifically capitalism, was going to harm the environment. That's how they came up with this term ecosystem. And truly, all of the first ecological authors, and they've all been well left of center, have actually been huge fans of Karl Marx, going all the way through to Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring, which is just loaded with misinformation.
Yeah, absolutely. In my book, The Lessons of the American Civilization, I get people to understand that socialism to communism is a post-industrial mentality turned into power politics, right? Throughout all of history, a highly commercialized society, we have unequal abilities, so you get unequal income, and then in there you get people who arise and say, well, this isn't fair. And it goes from there. And industrialization created just a huge dynamic. Then you get the media, meaning back then from newspapers to iPhones today, where this process gets on. And, I'm glad you bring these things up. People will say, well, they don't believe in the intensity of the movement and its believers and their desires. They think, oh, you're overblowing things, but they're not. Look, everybody now knows. Remember all these campus protests. Oh, it was just misguided students. Well, now we know it wasn't misguided students. We know that foreign enemies added some money, the fuel to that fire, and they do the environmental movement in this state, and we need to come to understand. I'm being told I need to wrap up. Brian, tell people where they can get a hold of you and your books.
Well, thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure being on your podcast, and I wish you the best of success with this. BrianSussman.com is the website, BrianSussman.com, the website. And of course, the new book is Climate Cult, Exposing and Defeating the War on Life, Liberty, and Property. And you can purchase that anywhere, including Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. Climate Cult.
So, Brian, I've always appreciated your fearlessness over the years. And now that you're not even on a bigger network, you're
even more
fearlessness grows. So we appreciate you being here, everybody. This has been Del Beccaro and Hook. We're pleased to have Brian on the show. Keep in mind, we're growing as a network. Steve, tell them all the places they can find us.
Oh, it'd be easier to list the places you can't, but let's start with Rumble, YouTube. Don't forget our Patriot page, patriot.tv/DHED. And also, Tom, as we announced yesterday, and we're proud of it, we've got our own landing page, and it's easier now because people don't have to figure out how to spell your name. It's DellAndHook.com, DellAndHook.com.
Good.
So there you go. Brian, thank you so much for a wonderful chat today, man.
Right on, guys. Thanks.
We'll be right back with more Del Beccaro and Hook right after this.
Welcome back to Del Beccaro and Hook. Steve, between Victor David Hanson and Brian, I hope people got an understanding that you can live your life day to day, but you need to understand that there are elements out there whose job some of this is, and it is this stuff is happening under the radar. And
Yeah.
I'm pleased that the freedom of speech is coming back into vogue. I talk about the importance of freedom of speech at length in my book, The Lessons of American Civilization. I hope you go out and get it. But these fires which are now threatening the Olympics, UCLA in Los Angeles, this is a heavy price for people to pay about it. And I understand we have a clip coming up here to talk more about it. Why don't you?
Well, it's the thing is, Tom, this kind of really we heard the VDH clip in the first segment of the show. Of course, Brian was great. And the main connecting thread here is this ideology of the left when it comes to environmentalism. It's way out of control. And this one thing that I'm always fearful of is apathy. Whenever I see somebody that says, I don't give a damn about politics, I'm like, well, you ought to. You ought to give a damn about politics, because I think it was Pleiades that said, you can say you don't care about politics, but never forget politics cares about you.
Especially with government half of the U.S. economy with regulations.
Exactly right.
And
that's why they want to censor.
Yeah, in the olden days when that shirt was in style, you could live in West Virginia and government wouldn't bother you. But now you can't.
Yeah.
Everything we do, it's on us all the time. As you know, living down by the coast in Jersey, right?
Yep.
Everything is circumvented.
Yep.
And that's why it's so important to curtail this. But why don't we show that?
Yeah, let's show this. Michael Schellenberger basically encapsulating, well, you'll see. Play the clip.
I mean, who could have guessed that the people who were so anti-civilization would be so bad at maintaining civilization? I mean, this was completely preventable. We knew that there were Santa Ana winds. We knew that there was huge fire risk. Many reports have been done on this. We just saw there that helicopters actually do a pretty good job when they're mobilized. Why weren't they mobilized for the Pacific Palisades fire? Why wasn't the National Guard mobilized earlier? Why did we not have enough water for the fire at pressurized levels on the fire hydrants? There's many excuses that get made. People explain these things. They say, well, the reservoirs were full. There weren't enough reservoirs. We haven't had a significant water projects built since 1979. LA, as everyone knows, is right next to the ocean. So why don't we have desalination plants like they have in Israel that work incredibly well, that would have been able to pump fresh water right from the oceans? So, I mean, look, it's a catastrophe. People should be absolutely outraged about it. It is a direct consequence of what you were saying, this woke ideology. We saw voters who, making racialist assumptions, decided not to elect the white male candidate. I saw focus groups where voters talked about they didn't want to vote for the white male candidate, even though he was talking about increasing the fire department budget, whereas Mayor Karen Bass cut it. So ultimately, we talk about these culture wars as though it doesn't affect anything. I think we see the effect of the radical left's culture war against civilization, against the United States, directly on the ground in Los Angeles.
Yeah, kind
Absolutely.
of exactly what we've been talking about.
Yeah. By the way, you don't have to go to Israel. San Diego has a desalination plant, and they have one of the best water departments in the state. And of course, they have fire dangers and winds as well. And again, the the Earth was there before we were. The Santa Ana winds were there before we were. What's different is that we're putting houses in places that are high risk, but not providing, as Michael just pointed out, the infrastructure necessary to sustain life in those areas. And this is the price we pay for this sort of thing. In my own house where I live is not as dangerous as the Palisades, but still dangerous. The area, 2.7 million Californians, the population greater. I mentioned this last night. I mentioned it on Newsmax the other night. 2.7 million people, greater than the population of 15 states, live in immediate, adjacent Napa County, famed Napa County, the wine industry, everything. 60% since 2017, 60% of that county, Steve, has been touched by fire.
Wow.
60%.
Yeah.
And so when do the policy, and they have great water systems. They have a natural great water system.
Yeah, but they don't allow them to deforest. They don't allow them to, forest maintenance is not even considered.
It's not just forest. It is hillside. It is neighborhoods.
Yeah.
It has to happen everywhere. You know, even fires don't need a lot of fuel to start, and they don't need a lot of wind to expand, and they got to come to grips with that. And so, as tragic as this is, and you know, friends of mine keep sending me pictures of this tragedy. You know, the fact that woke ideology and the censorship took a huge hit in this last election. These still only represent opportunities.
Yeah.
Opportunities politically for people to provide an alternative. The shackles have been broken, but the realignment hasn't occurred. And until the Republicans provide a better alternative and succeed on it, we could be right back in the same position.
It's shocking to even hear you say that, but I know you're right. I know you're right. It's very, very scary. And you know, you mentioned that it's not only forest. You're right. It's people's backyards, but it's not like they don't want to clean their backyard, but they can't. They're prevented. It's like here in New Jersey. You have a backyard that has a puddle in it, 60 feet wide. All of a sudden, the state comes in and says, you know what? That's a water land. You can't touch that. It's like, wait a minute. This is leaking into my basement. Well, then why don't you move? I mean, that's the kind of government regulation, the regulatory state. It's just insane with the left, and we're seeing it play out. The whole world is with what's going down, the tragedy in LA. Unbelievable.
Yeah. So next week we're of course getting into inauguration territory, aren't we? Real quick, I think all these other stories are going to help with the Trump cabinet getting approved, because all these now things are flying under the radar. I think Hegseth gets through. I think Republicans still have a little trouble with Tulsi Gabbard, but I think that'll be the flashpoint. But otherwise, I think everybody gets through.
Yeah, and by the way, it's worth pointing out, too, one of those nominees is Kristi Noem, and she's going to make a great interior secretary. And I guarantee you her attitude about fire maintenance and water infrastructure and stuff is a lot different than they are in California. But good point. Anyway, great show today, Tom. And great. We want to thank Brian Sussman for joining us today. That was a very, very lively conversation with him. And we thank you, of course. We remind you that you can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Rumble. You can find us at patriot.tv/DHED. And don't forget X American News. And again, we're very, very proud. And I want to thank Annie, our producer, intrepid producer, who's done a hell of a job on our new landing page, DellAndHook.com, DellAndHook.com. And I guess until next week, Tom.
All right.
Goodbye. Take care.
Stay safe in LA, everybody.
Here, here.